Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Remember the Girls' ninth webinar of our 2021 webinar series. Remember the Girls is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting and advocating for female carriers and female patients of X-linked disorders, a group often overlooked by the medical profession. I'm Taylor Kane, the founder and executive director of Remember the Girls and the moderator for today's event. The topic of this webinar is grief and loss in the X-linked community. We would like to thank our sponsors of our 2021 webinar series, Horizon Therapeutics, Bluebird Bio, Ultragenyx Pharmaceutical, and Sanofi Genzyme. Today, we are joined by Remember the Girls members, Jamie, Emma, Marissa, and Amy, who will be talking about their personal experiences with an X-linked disease and grief and loss in the community. We are having an open discussion and we have a few leading questions, but if you have any additional questions that you would like the panelists to address, please feel free to send those in the Zoom chat or comment them on Facebook, and we will try our best to get to them by the end of the webinar. This webinar is also being recorded, so it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel and our website as well. So if you would like to watch it again or share it with anyone in your family or a friend who you think would benefit from being part of this conversation, you'll be able to do so. Okay, so we can kick things off and jump into our first question here, where we will have the panelists introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their relationship to Remember the Girls in this topic. So our first question is, what is your relationship to grief and loss in the X-linked disease community? And I'll pass that first to Amy.
My name's Amy. I have ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, or OTC for short. And my relationship with grief and loss in the X-linked community is that I lost a brother to OTC.
Thanks for sharing. Marissa?
Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa Sampson, and I'm a carrier of X-linked severe combined immune deficiency syndrome, which we normally refer to as SCID. It's characterized by complete loss of immune function and affects the development of the white blood cells, the T cells, B cells, and so on, and results in the ability of the body to have the inability to fight off diseases and infections. So my direct link to grief and loss in this community is that about 30 years ago, I lost a brother to this disease. And that's also subsequently how I knew to go for genetic counseling and find out that I was a carrier.
Thank you, Marissa. Emma?
Hello, my name is Emma Bliss. I am a female carrier for myotubular myopathy. My journey in grief and loss really started when I was 13 years old, when I lost my sister. She passed away from AML leukemia when we were young. She fought for a year. That really started my grieving journey as a person. But when my second son was born, he lived for 5 months in the NICU. And during that NICU stay, he was diagnosed with myotubular myopathy. And through that testing, I was diagnosed as a carrier. And he passed away after 5 months. He never left the NICU. But I do have an older son who is 7 and a girl who is 1, and she has a 50% chance of being a carrier as well. I also had a pregnancy in between my second son, Caleb, and my daughter, Isla, that we did choose to terminate due to him being affected with myotubular myopathy. And that's another level of loss that I've never experienced before. So there's different layers of loss and grieving, but it really started when I was younger and it's continued on throughout my life.
Thanks, Emma. And Jamie?
Hi guys, I'm Jamie Barlow. I'm from California. My son, Bradley, was diagnosed with ALD in 1999. I got blessed to get to meet my biological mother, our family has a very long history of this, but I was adopted, so I didn't know. I'm a carrier of adrenal leukodystrophy, and I lost my son July 2017.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here today. Obviously, this is a really sensitive topic, and it can always be hard, no matter how much time has passed, to talk about a lost loved one and to talk about grief. So I really appreciate you being willing to be so vulnerable. And of course, there's so many women in our group, which has now over 1,000 women who have experienced loss in one way or another connected to X-linked disease, but outside of X-linked disease as well. So thank you. Our second question asks, what is the most difficult part of the grieving process in your personal experience? And whoever wants to jump in first, just feel free to do so, and we can just keep the conversation flowing.
The first thing that comes to mind for me as being one of the most difficult processes is how you relate to other people. Specifically, when I lost my son, just how you communicate with other people, your relationships with other people, you go through life differently, and you can't relate the same to other people. I think when you lose a sibling, it's a similar relation. It's similar in the sense that you are now growing up in a different position in your family. Your relationship with your parents are different. Your relationships with every family member, every person you see, loss makes you look at life in a whole different way. And I think you being able to relate to other people, it just changes. It's not good or bad. It's just different. That's my first initial thought. I wouldn't say it's the hardest, but it's my first initial thought.
I had a similar thought as you, Emma, in the sense of, because I lost a brother, I just turned 7 years old. So this was a major loss for a child to go through. And children, obviously, at that age, have this different view of the world and the way that we process things as children. Personally, I did a lot of art, I did a lot of writing, I did a lot of drawing, I did that sort of thing as a child. But as I grew up, I think I revisited that period of my life at the beginning of university, and it's almost like I grieved again, but this time as an adult, because now I had a new outlook on life and my circumstances. And something that I discovered was that not everybody had lost a family member as a child. And you just go through, as a kid, you take everything at face value. You think this is normal. And you don't realize that these are extraordinary sets of circumstances that have put us into a position where we have this rare disease in our family, or we've lost someone to something like this. So I think for me, the hardest part was grieving at different levels of my life. Grieving initially as a child, grieving as a young adult, when I went back into my history and tried to learn more about it. And then again, grieving as I'm trying to plan a family at the age where I want to have my own children. And do I get to do that? Do I get to be a mother like I always wanted to? There's lots of different stages that we go through, and it changes.
Yeah. Another thing that is very difficult, and I'm going through it right now, is I've joined a lot of infant loss support groups or sibling loss support groups, and I join these groups and I still don't feel like I can relate to a lot of these women. And sometimes I look at it like there's something wrong with me because I can't relate to everybody's pain, even though you're almost expected to. You're expected to relate to other people who have gone through loss, but every journey is so different that it's hard to even relate to people who have gone through the same thing. And people have expectations around that aren't always realistic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that grief is so multidimensional. And as Marissa said, or alluded to, like, grief is never something that ends. It just changes over time, and the way you experience it is constantly changing.
Yeah.
But yeah, Emma, that reminds me, I feel like when I was a teenager, I was always the person that my friends would come to if they had lost like a grandparent, and because they knew I had been through a loss since I lost my dad when I was 5 years old, and I was always happy to try to help, but I couldn't really relate to their experience at all because mine was just so completely different that it is
You're
hard.
different people. You're different
Yeah.
people. I've had so many women try to connect me with other people who have lost infants specifically. And it's like, I will gladly reach out and be a friend and be helpful, but there's nothing more I can say or do that's going to change anything. It's like you join this club of grief and loss, but everybody's lost and looking to find these answers that aren't ever going to be there. And it's just but your expectations are that you're going to get there at some point. Do you know what I mean? Like you're lost, but you're looking for the end of it, but there is no end. So you're just lost. And but your expectations are that you're going to find something that's going to miraculously heal you, instead of you realizing that you have to just learn to live with this.
I can also kind of relate to what Marissa said. I was really young. I almost actually, had some second guess myself coming on here because I was so young when I lost my brother. I was 3, and I was kind of like, well, I don't know if I have the right to be on here with people who have, it's just something I feel like I've always kind of judged my own grief, because when people find out that I lost a brother to the same disease I have and my mom is a carrier, they're always like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I always felt like, why are you saying that to me? Because it's my parents' loss. Like I've always just felt for my parents who really went through that. Because my mom planned to have like 3 children, and she, that loss just kind of set them back, and it created a different journey for them. But I think I can really relate to what Marissa said, because I feel like when I was 3, like I had physical, like I didn't know how to process that. I had physical, like problems, like I was potty trained and then reverted back, and just, you don't really know how to express that. But then, as I got older, I kind of was like, well, why did this have to happen? Like, why can't I? Because I've always wanted a sibling. So I was always kind of like angry about that. And then, I know that guilt was another part of this, and I feel like another part of this topic. And I, have heard so many amazing stories of the newborn screening test saving so many babies and so many people's infants. And part of me gets mad because I'm like, if only it was there when he needed it, but then I feel bad because obviously science is always changing. And sorry that my fire alarm is chirping, it needs new batteries. But I always kind of felt like that wasn't okay. So I feel like grief is really multidimensional, because I felt, anger, like sadness. And I think like as an adult, you do look at it differently. And I don't know. I just like, I feel like a lot of my grief is more of like, what if, like, what would my life be like? Like, how would it be different? But I do try to put a positive spin on it and say, if he hadn't, if what hadn't happened to him, like my mom wouldn't have known she was a carrier, and then I could have died when I was diagnosed. So I try to put a positive spin on that as much as I can. I mean, obviously my grief is not fresh and immediate, like, some of yours, but I do think that my grief has been more like lifelong a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add into what, sorry,
Yeah, please do.
I wanted to add into what Amy is talking about, the guilt, because I think that is a major part of grief as well. And when you lose someone at such a young age, I think you have this guilt, but you don't know that's what it is. And that you, as an adult, you realize there was no reason for you to feel guilty. It was out of your hands. You could do nothing, but you couldn't do anything differently. But as a child, you don't understand that. And I think through years of therapy, I've realized that I had a lot of survivor's guilt as a child, because it was, why'd this happen to him? And now, my older brother and I, who are healthy, we get to live and he didn't. And for me, I think that also affected me growing up in this. I had this extreme, I wanted to please. I was a very good child for a long time because I didn't want to create any other problems for my parents or for for other members of the family because we already had this traumatic experience. And then, of course, that changed as I got a little bit older and became more angry. But those are all parts of grieving, is feeling those kind of emotions too.
Yeah, that is such an excellent point, Marissa. I'm so glad you bring that up. And I also relate to Amy and Marissa's stories a lot because I lost my dad when I was 5. And over the years, I've had a lot of people say things to me like, oh, it's good that you were so young because you don't really remember it. Like, they try to compare it. And I've even done that internally. Like, I've looked at other people who have lost a parent when they were in high school, and I'm like, my experience is not as bad as theirs. Like, I've compared it in my own mind, which just isn't beneficial for anyone. But I think we forget that there's all these additional things that come out of grief. Like, Marissa, you mentioned, how you've had these feelings of having to please people, and, that's impacted you for your whole life. Like, after my dad passed away, I started getting anxiety, which I still have, 20 years later. And I don't think people always realize that grief affects you in so many different ways. Like, it's not just the loss, like it changes who you are as a person. And yeah, we do learn to live with it, but we also have to remember that, some of the reasons why we are who we are is because of what we've gone through. So I'm really glad that you bring that point up. And you both spoke to it that really eloquently.
Very good. Once again, I'm Jamie. My biggest thing with my grief is feeling like I missed something. So as my son's full-time caregiver, and I'm a nurse, and I've been told I didn't miss anything, but I feel I still did. And for me, I'm sorry guys, just chokes me up. When my son passed, and even now, I'm still trying to find what my new purpose is. Because for the first time, since I was 17 years old, I don't have a child in my life to take care of. I'm now 55, but I've been with children from 17 to 51. So I have no kids. So what's my new purpose? My kids were my purpose. And I'm still trying to find my purpose. So my grief, the best thing is just allow it to happen. Don't hold it in. It's got to happen. Just like now, I can't control this. And my son visits me often, so I'm good with that.
And you have your beautiful granddaughter
Yes,
that I
I
love
do.
seeing pictures of on Facebook. She's so adorable.
The one from today is just amazing. And without my son, the gift he gave our family, being an adoptee, not knowing my history, with my daughter being a carrier, my granddaughter's free of this crap. The only thing she'll have to see is her grandma losing her mobility and her mom starting to have symptoms, which really sucks. But the picture Candace showed me this morning is just absolutely amazing of this little girl. And I know I can show you guys. It'll only take a second to pull her up. Let's see if we can get in here near.
Oh, yep. Aw.
Look at the little worm on her hand.
Oh, beautiful.
I love
cutest.
blonde hair.
She got an almost hair color. But yeah, that little girl's just amazing every day. Like I said, for me, from 17 to 51, I had a child in my home. Now it's only me. Okay, what's my next quest? Where do I go now? What is my purpose? Where do I need to spend my time? So I know it'll get there when it's supposed to, but it's not here yet.
And it's great that you're able to, admit that and say that things are tough for you. I think social media and even some support groups we're in, people always want to seem, brave and tough for other people, but just being able to admit like when you're not okay is just so important. So I'm
Except for
glad.
my purpose, I've been a nurse for 30 years. So nobody here knows. I fell 2018. I was forced to retire because they wouldn't allow me to work as a nurse
doing different things. So I know one of the other questions is the loss of my mobility, which really sucks. And it has gotten worse, Tyler, since I've seen you last. So I've fallen a few times. I fell in January, broke my ankle with my walk. So yeah, that kind of stuff happens and it really sucks. So thanks, guys. You're awesome. Love you.
Thank you, Jamie. So for our next question, what advice would you give to someone who has recently lost a loved one to an X-linked disease? Or, I mean, any disease for that matter, or just lost someone in general, however you want to speak to it.
I would say to validate every emotion that comes through. But at the end of the day, I truly believe that getting to work and putting your grief into an actionable, just putting it, getting yourself into action neutralizes any negative emotion. Instead of getting stuck with the feelings that you have, acknowledge them, but get to work. For me, I think giving value to that loss in some way, in any small way, makes me feel better. Now that I've gone through tremendous loss, I also feel like it gives me a sense of being able to appreciate and have greater sense of gratitude for what I have now. I now view life, everything is temporary. Anything you're going through, any hardship, everything seems small in comparison. Everything else seems temporary. So I know, Jamie, that you're still searching for your passion and your purpose. Maybe it's not one thing. Maybe it's just keeping busy, joining the clubs, spending time with people you love. Like, it doesn't have to be one specific thing that you're putting all your weight into, but maybe it's just something, gardening. I actually joined a garden club in my local town. Literally, I'm the youngest person by 30 years, but it's the most amazing, fun activity that I do once or twice a month. And it's just keeping busy, keeping distracted, doing things you're passionate about, doing things you love. Even if it's silly, like a garden club, like, it's just keeping busy, but also keeping yourself moving forward. I truly believe that action will neutralize any negative emotion out there.
And with my mobility issues, I do have a garden. It's beautiful. For me to get out there and work, I love it. I love playing in the dirt. I still get out there and I scoop my butt through the dirt. Oh, well, I'm a little dirty.
Yeah.
And because of my beautiful daughter, Candace, she asked me, Mom, when's the last time you played your guitar? Wow. I didn't realize what impact it made on her, because I used to love it when we would just sit down and you would play and sing to me. So I got my guitars out. I haven't started yet. I tried tuning them on my 12 string, and every string that I tried to tune broke because they're over 30 years old. So I'll be restringing my guitar, and I don't need mobility for that. I can sit anywhere and play.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
I sat with Aurora, me and her played together, and she was just so, you can play that, Oma.
Yeah.
She's just amazing.
And if that is something that you love and you're passionate about, go big with it, make videos of it, be silly with it. If that's something you're happy about, put all your emotions into something, and maybe it'll help.
I think advice that I would have is, I didn't really realize it but I think the way Emma said, to validate every emotion, because I think, sometimes people view anger as bad, and that is a part of grief, and, it's okay to be angry. And I think that's really important, number one, like she said. But I also think for me, I mean, I don't know all of you, but I like having a urea cycle disorder, something that's very rare, like what all of you have. I feel like when I had started to get involved in like online communities and, a little bit more active through here, that really helped me in ways that I never knew that I needed. I felt like I wasn't alone anymore, even if there was someone, in California, I was like, okay, this person knows what I'm going through. Like, they can understand. And so I guess my advice would be to find your people, or find people who can understand, because even though we all, the four of us have something different, we all can relate to each other in that it's an X-linked disease. We've all had loss. And, I think whether it's someone that has your exact disease, that might be hard to find. But, if you can find people who will be there for you and can just maybe not know your exact pain, but can relate and understand on some level.
That's so well put, Amy. I agree 100% as well. And to add to that, I think, and also what Emma was saying about using those emotions and sort of channeling them into something, whether it's a creativity, whether it's advocacy, whether it's supporting others online, it's doing something that you feel like that you can help, because we may not have been able to help our circumstances, but maybe we can help someone else understand their circumstances. And talking about finding our people, I was just blown away when my invitation came through from Taylor for Remember the Girls. And I said, this is incredible, because it is such an overlooked community. And someone like me, no, I'm not sick. My son isn't sick. That doesn't mean that I don't have valid feelings of the fear of passing on this disorder, or it doesn't make my story any less valuable. And so Remember the Girls, I think, is especially just so special, because it gives us all that connection that we maybe didn't know that we needed, or that wasn't there. And when I went, before we decided to try to have a baby, I did a lot of research, and I went to the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, where my brother was treated almost 30 years ago. And luckily, the head of immunology there, his name's Dr. Chaim Roifman, and he's amazing. And I got to sit down with him 30 years later and talk about options for the disease. And he, not only gave me information that I could use to help make our decision of how we wanted to go about expanding our family, but he also said to me that my group of women and girls, that as a hospital, they should be trying to reach us as well, and provide support for us for genetic therapy, because, my brother was sick and this happened, but then what about the rest of us? There could be more cases coming up because of these genetics. And if I hadn't gone in and said, hey, I need genetic counseling, then would I have known? Would the disease keep going in my family? So again, you think this big institution, this world-renowned hospital, this, they realize too that maybe there's something they could do to help support the women who are, on the outside of this disease, who are associated and affiliated with it, but aren't sick, but could, create, sick babies. And it's just a really amazing to see how this information came up, and Remember the Girls was created. And I thought, this is something that we can use to reach other institutions and hospitals and other associations, to spread awareness and to help further, the fact that we're not alone, and our feelings are valuable, and that we can do something.
Yeah, I think
positive.
Yeah, I think being female patients and carriers of our excellent conditions gives us a different perspective on that, because we have an easier platform to share our story and share with other people who understand, or I think it allows us to help. I think sharing your story at any capacity is going to be healing for most people. I do believe you should acknowledge and validate every feeling. I think you should visit those feelings, but I don't think that you should live in those feelings. And I think that's kind of the key element for me, is that I will feel something, I'll acknowledge it, I will validate it, I will try to understand it, but then I will leave it and I will let it go, and I will let myself be free of those negative feelings that might come up from grief or loss. And I think it absolutely helps when you have an easy platform to share your journey, share your story, help other women that have been in your shoes or are in your shoes currently. And I think that is a big piece of my healing journey, is just sharing my journey in general.
And
Emma.
just don't be so hard on yourself. That's kind of the bottom line.
Yes,
Definitely.
absolutely.
Yeah, I really like, the concept that is bringing up about, feeling all your different types of feelings. And I want to talk about anger for a second. This is definitely something I've been thinking about a lot, or have experienced even as part of my advocacy, working towards treatments for ALD is so exciting. And we have, some things in the pipeline, but it definitely is bittersweet, like knowing that, my dad and my uncle and so many other boys with ALD, are just never going to have, these are coming too late. And so there, when Amy said, talking about newborn screening, that really reminded me of these bittersweet feelings that can come out of, advocating, and getting new treatments is so incredible and it's something to celebrate, but it can also cause like anger and frustration. And anyone wants, to talk about like how they've dealt with those more negative feelings, like not sadness, but more like the anger or frustration. I think that's a really important topic, and one that we need to talk about more because it's definitely real.
I know that I've definitely struggled with that because I think it's amazing. I actually was on a different call with just specific to OTC. And, there was a woman who I actually, kept in touch with, and she has a son who has OTC. And because of newborn screening, he's alive. And, like you said, it's one of those things, it's bittersweet, and you don't want to, it almost feels ugly to admit that you can be like that's because you're just, I know for me, I'm like, if only this had happened, like is same thing with you. Like, obviously science and medicine is always changing and advancing. And I'm happy for that because, maybe one day it'll afford me to have a child that will, be healthy and help me out. But, I think it's definitely, for me, I've always judged my grief, and that makes me angry because I've always kind of like felt like, well, if I was so young, I don't get to be sad about it. I don't get to have a feeling about it. And I know, but, just like Taylor, you said with your dad, like, yeah, if someone loses, there's no good time or reason to lose someone, but you're left with a lot of what ifs. And I think for me, that is the biggest. It's just been kind of like, this isn't, when people ask me like, do you have any brothers or sisters? Like, it's always like, I'm like, well, that's a loaded question, but I don't go into the whole story with everyone because it's a little heavy, but I think a lot of my anger comes from the what ifs of, and then this is going to probably sound horrible, but my mom is a carrier. And there are some times when I'm like, why don't you have this? Like, why don't you have symptoms? Like she's a carrier, but she doesn't present with symptoms. So like, I do get sick sometimes. I do require like medical attention sometimes, but my mom does not. And as of right now, anyway. And, so there have been times where I even feel like, like this isn't fair, but, it's not something I hold on to because I know that like, I mean, she's told me like, if I could have this instead of you, I would have, just like any parent, most parents would not want their child to have something like that. But I think anger is a big part of it. And obviously it's a stage of grief, but I do think it's something that's like overlooked a lot, like you said.
Yeah, I love how you talked about the question of how many siblings you have. I get asked this all the time, siblings and children, and every single time I respond differently, and I always feel awkward either way, right? So if somebody says, "How many children do you have?" and I say two, um, I feel guilty for leaving out Caleb. And then if I say three, then I feel like I have to explain more because I only have two children with me. And then if I say, sometimes I will say I have two children here on earth and then one in heaven. And then I feel like I have to explain more. And then people just don't know what to say. They either say the wrong thing or they just don't know what to say. And I'm left feeling awkward in any capacity. So I mean, it's just something to bring up is
What
there
I've
isn't a right answer.
what I've kind of said, and I'll just be like, yeah, well, my parents wanted more, but it didn't work out. But like, I agree, it is hard because like, I don't want to be like none, but it's not something you go. I mean, my close friends know, and close, obviously, but like you said, it's not something you're going to go into, and people don't know what to say. And I've always been very weird when people are like, I'm sorry. I get why they say it. I don't get offended at all.
Mhm.
But for me, I'm like, I don't really remember it physically, like, or like I knew what was going on. I obviously had reactions, but it is an awkward question.
It's awkward in general. I mean, I lost my son 3 years ago, and people will say I'm sorry, and I'm like, it's okay. Like, what does that even mean? Like, I'm sorry. Like, it's just like a weird, awkward response, and I feel like there's nothing right to say there. But like when somebody says I'm sorry, I'll be like, oh yeah, it's okay. Like, what is that?
Like it's not okay. Yeah, since I was a kid, my mom says that I used to hate when people would say I'm sorry because I never knew what to respond. But
Mhm.
even now, when I see someone who has lost someone, I never know what to say either. Like,
Same, yeah.
like there really isn't the right thing to say because, yeah, I either usually respond when people say to me saying like it's okay, even though you're obviously not meaning like it's actually okay. It's obviously not
Right.
okay. Or I say thank you, which is
Yeah.
also just weird. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is always awkward, and I don't know how we get past that. But
No, because I've also tried other responses, and I feel like I just keep digging deeper into this like hole of like awkwardness. Like I over explain, and people don't know what to say to that. So then I just keep going, and it's just like word vomit.
My answer to the sibling question definitely changed throughout my life. When I was younger, very unfiltered child, I would tell people, oh, I have two brothers, one of them's dead, and this is what happened. And it was just like, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't realize that the people I was telling this to were like, what is this kid saying? So definitely as I grew up and, sort of had a more understanding of relationships and people, just talking to people, my answer to that question changed because that not every detail of your life needs to be shared with every person. And, I think about it, is this worth bringing up? You know what? It's not worth it for me to rehash something, and it's not worth it to put them in that position. And it's not because I don't love my brother or I don't want to honor his memory or anything, but some things I think are just better left unsaid when you know that it's just going to create even more awkwardness. So it's really amazing that I can say this to you women who know exactly what I mean.
especially with a rare disease, like, it's not something as simple like, oh, they passed away of a heart attack. Like, you'll say, oh, they passed away of adrenal leukodystrophy, and then having to explain what that is, and then going into me being a carrier. Like, yeah, it just goes into like a 10-minute thing. So yeah, I definitely sometimes just avoid it depending on the situation, just because I know it will go into a 10-minute thing, and then I don't mind answering questions, but sometimes like, yeah, it's just not the environment. Like a lot of times in college, I'd be like going out and something about my dad would come up, and I'd be like, I don't really want to kill the mood by talking about like my dad who died. So it's just sometimes easier to like just avoid it. But
I read
that's-
something. I read something recently it said oversharing stems from trauma. And it really got me thinking because there's been many situations where I just keep talking just to like fill that awkward silence. So recently I've been working on that quite a bit. Oversharing stems from trauma. And I think it's true to some degree, right?
Yeah, and I think also just to kind of add on to that, picking what you decide to disclose in a certain situation. And it also ties into anger. When I was younger, I was very angry that my parents didn't have a picture of our little brother in the house. After he passed, it wasn't on display for whoever happens to be in our house to see. And she had pictures of him in her bedroom. But I didn't understand at the time, here's me, here's my older brother, here's you, where's Josh? I didn't understand that for her, that's putting that part of herself and her memory and her life, out on display for anyone who walks in the house. And, as a child, I was angry that he wasn't there. But now that I'm older, I understand that she was, in a way protecting herself and her emotions as well by not having to bring it up to those people who maybe don't need to know. Maybe you don't need to get into that oversharing, right? So I understand it a lot better now that I'm older, and I think those are all just parts of the process,
Yeah. I was a teenager when I lost my sister, who was a couple years younger than me. I'm the oldest. I was the oldest of four, and she was the second child. And I was a teenager, and I spent a lot of years angry. I put the blame, a lot of it, on my parents, just because it was an easy way. It was an easy teenage solution. And even into my adult years, I would always, I would say things in my head like I would have done it differently, or I would have grieved differently than they did, or I would have made different choices after she died, or until I experienced it myself and I lost a child, did I not understand it completely, in the sense that people are just trying to survive after such a tremendous loss. After I lost my son, I still, I chose to do things differently in my grieving than my parents did, but I understood that they were literally just trying to survive. When I lost my son, I had another child who at the time was 3.5, and I compared it to when I lost my sister, and I had siblings that were my youngest brother was 6 at the time. So I made comparisons to how my parents reacted to my siblings based on how I reacted to my son. And it was like, I was trying to compare, but I was trying to like take that as a learning experience. So I would do things differently. And it took me years to understand how wrong that was, to compare grief in that capacity, because again, my parents were just trying to survive, and I get it now. And it's sad that it took me all of that to understand, because I spent years and years angry at them as a teenager. But it took me a long time to really like grieve the fact that I wasn't really angry with my parents, or if they had done things differently, it was okay. If that makes any sense.
It does. Yeah. That's definitely a really amazing realization, Emma. And I feel like it also speaks to, the idea that you can't really understand something until you've been through something similar. Even though, it's not the same experience, like being able to put yourself in the shoes that your parents were in was able to like open your eyes to the judgment that you had when you were a teenager. So yeah, I think that's a really powerful, like really coming full circle. Thank you all for
Yeah.
sharing.
It makes me think that some things in here are not meant to be. I hate that phrase, meant to be, like it's meant to be, but like things just are connected in weird ways. It's just strange how life is, right?
Yeah. Well, one more question that I want to get to, because this is also a really important one when we talk about the topic of grief and loss. So our last question, when we think of grief and loss in the X-linked disease community, we most often think of a loved one like a son, a father, or a brother who has passed away. But are there other forms of grief and loss that you have experienced?
I think the way that you grieve one thing is almost the way that you grieve anything in different levels and different capacities, but it's the same process at the end of the day. Like you lose your favorite sweater and then sounds so stupid, but there is a grieving process to every kind of loss to some degree.
Like for me, just, it wasn't the loss of my son. With my fall in 2018, it's the loss of my job, my career, what I'd worked my butt off to get. Now all of a sudden, now I'm disabled and at home and with no kids and. So I can be angry all I want and it doesn't change anything. So like I said before, what is my new purpose? Maybe it's just playing my guitar. I already play out in the dirt and cook when I can, but it's, it's hard to feed just one.
If that
It
makes you
sounds like, oh, yeah, sorry. It's almost like, Jamie, it's almost like losing parts of your identity.
Mhm,
That's what it sounds to me like what you're saying.
mhm.
Exactly. I've been a nurse for 30 years. And when I was forced to retire, it took me a while, but I went into my closet and I got every uniform out of my closet. It filled 2 grocery bags, or not grocery bags, big trash, like the big leaf bags. I filled 2 of those up, one of tops and one of pants. I had never been able to hang my clothes in my closet because I had uniforms. Then I'd called libraries or anybody if they wanted my medical books, because I had a ton of medical books and nobody would take them. So I said, fine. I went and got a recycle bin and I filled the damn recycle bin to the top with books. So that me getting rid of my uniforms and all of my medical books was tough. But I had a really good interview last Thursday, maybe. It's for a research group that is doing, they're doing the testing, they're doing the research. What is it called? They're doing clinical trials.
Yeah.
So I had a really good interview with them and I'm actually really excited. I looked up the business, looked up the company, and even with my walker, they welcomed me. Really, it was a really nice interview. So maybe that'll come through, who knows? And I'll be doing more research candidacy and be able to learn more about that because I'm kind of excited about it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Definitely keep me posted. I would love to hear how that goes.
Even
Yeah.
with that, looking up the company, I was so excited with the interview. I'm like, yeah, I would love to be doing that. That's right up my alley. It'd be
Yeah.
awesome.
Also with, purpose, you're so involved in the ALD community and Remember the Girls, and always the first one, to volunteer to talk about your story. So, I think that just by doing that, you are making a difference, in so many other people's lives. So you definitely need to remember that because you're very important to our community.
Thank you. And because it's Leukodystrophy Awareness Month, I don't know if you've noticed, I posted a new photo every day.
Oh, I actually don't think I noticed that.
No, every day I have a different photo up, whether it's leukodystrophy awareness, what leukodystrophy is, what it does, who it affects. I've changed it every day. It's been a new one every day.
Oh my gosh, that is an amazing effort. I need to check that out right after this.
But yeah, I think that grief or loss, it changes everything about you as a person. So you're grieving your sense of identity, you're grieving who you know yourself to be and your relationship with other people. I think as carriers, some of us can relate to, we're grieving. If we have symptoms, right, then we're also grieving who we thought we would be or how that relates to who we are. There's so many questions that it actually does bring up about yourself and your self-awareness.
Or even grieving something that hasn't happened yet or that you don't have yet. Like me knowing that ALD carriers have such a high chance of getting symptoms, even though I don't have them yet. Grieving what I'm likely will lose. It is weird that it can start before it even happens. It really is just such a complex thing. And it's, not just, losing a loved one. Like there's just so many different forms of grief.
Well, I think
Like-
also losing a child, and being a carrier, you grieve what you thought your family might look like. For me, I always thought I was one of 4. So I was like 3 or 4 kids. That sounds great. And then when Caleb was diagnosed and I was diagnosed a carrier, I was like, well, maybe my family isn't going to look the way that I thought it would be, or it wouldn't be created the same way. Since you look into other options for conception, or like we had my daughter, and she has a 50% chance of being a carrier too. If I wasn't here, would I want more children? I don't know. Like, it's just your whole sense of what your family looks like is a whole other concept as a carrier.
That's what I was going to speak to. Because growing up, I knew 2 things. I knew that I had a possibility of being a carrier of this rare genetic disease, but I also always knew that I wanted to be a mom. So, so I think I'm still, my son, my healthy son is almost 2.5 years old. And my husband and I have recently made the decision not to have any more children. And that's very hard because I feel like I have more love to give. I am currently grieving the fact that I won't be pregnant again, and I won't be able to go through all those wonderful experiences that come along with pregnancy and motherhood again. And I think going back to what we said before about sort of trivializing our emotions is that I could say, yeah, but I have one beautiful, amazing son already. Why do I need another one? Why take a chance? I should be happy with what I have. So here you are running in circles, between your wants, your needs, your desires, and your emotions. And then you think of all of the stuff at a rational level, and you think, is it worth it to take these chances? And or do I want to go through IVF? Do I want to do pre-implantation genetic testing? Do I want to put myself through that and my body through that? And for me, I've decided I don't. I've decided that that any of the ways I've looked at it, having another baby myself is not going to work out. So as much as I feel the emotional want to have another child, that logical sort of balance, the other side, complete opposite of the emotions, is where I've decided to go with and say, you know what, I'm going to follow my head in this part and not my heart. And I think that the grieving process of grieving something that that only existed in your mind. I had several kids growing up in my mind. I was going to have lots of babies, and now with the situation being what it is, I've had to sort of learn that's not realistic for me, and that's not the sort of path that I want to go on. I don't like the options that I'm presented with, and that sucks, but I'm learning how to be okay with it. And that's a whole nother side of grief that this family didn't even exist. But I'm sad that it's not going to.
Yeah, it took me a long time to also realize that you can simultaneously feel gratitude and grief at the same time. You can feel something negative and something positive in the same minute. Because I always felt like it was balancing, like I was grieving, so I couldn't be happy that I had the children that I had, or if I was grieving, then I wasn't feeling grateful for the children that I do have, but it took me a long time to realize you can feel both at the exact same time, and it's okay. That's totally okay.
I think for me, for grief came a little differently. I think being diagnosed as a teenager, I had to grieve in a different way, not necessarily sad. I think it was just kind of like my life. I went from being this normal kid who could eat anything they wanted, didn't take anything except a multivitamin, to walking out of a hospital with a restricted diet on a ton of medication. I think that was like a different type of grief for me. I didn't really deal with it, to be honest, very well until I was really had some unhealthy habits and became a little bit non-compliant with some things. And then I really had to I started therapy to kind of realize that I was in denial about this. So I think that you can, like, grieving someone who you used to be almost, or, you know, like a way of life. For me, I didn't have any restrictions, to then being diagnosed and just having all these restrictions in place. And for me, there's a lot of fear of the future a little bit. I'm grateful that my medical team is amazing and has never made me feel like I couldn't have children, but I definitely worry about what it will look like. You know, my mom has lost a child, and I know that obviously what I have affects boys more severely, but I am grateful for newborn screening because I know that obviously does amazing things. But I think for me, grief has also come in when I am sick and I'm in the hospital. Sometimes that realizing that you can't have control, like that grief, like you lose control sometimes. There are times where you just can't be in control. You're not well enough to be in control. And that is something that makes me very angry at the time. But I just think it's really interesting how, like, everyone's grief is so different. And I really agree with what Emma said. Like, it's okay to feel different things at the same time. Like, they can coexist.
Great. Does anyone have any final comments? This was such an amazing discussion, and it's crazy how our stories are all so different, but we can all relate to each other in so many ways. And I know that so many women in our group will also be able to relate to this as well. So I want to thank you all for spending your night with me and for speaking about this incredibly important topic. It's definitely something that I want more of Remember the Girls to be dedicated to, because like we said, it is so complex. And you know, with X-linked diseases, you know, being rare and the way that we may experience them as carriers, we just don't have the support that we always need. So I think we just need to be talking about these things more and supporting each other. So I want to thank all of you.
And I want to thank all of you too for being here
Thank you.
and supporting us or supporting each other. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. You're all amazing women.
Yes, thank you. This was so nice.
All right. Have a great rest of your night. And I will let you know when the recording is up on our YouTube page if you want to share it.